Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last video here on YouTube, but here I am again, wanting to give you some insights into how I kitbash these Deathwing folks here. In fact, I will show you the process on this particular one, and based on that, break down the other ones at the end of the video. The obvious starting point for most of my Deathwing conversions was the Deathwing Knights kit, but if you follow me on Instagram, you might have recognized that I recently started to develop an obsession with these blank chest plates. So to apply this same approach to this Deathwing member, I used the chest piece from the regular Terminators instead. My process to get rid of any insignia is to chop off the most prominent parts with a hobby clipper and then use the knife to carve off the remainings. I use the lower section of the knife and use the scraping motion while trying to move along the round shape of the piece. And for the more nasty bits on the side, I then use the tip of the knife with a more gentle motion. Now that the piece is almost clean, I use a fine grit sanding paper like this 3000 grit one and hover over the surface in little circular motions. At least that's what I try. Since those pieces are pretty tiny, sometimes I'm just happy to hit the surface with whatever motion I'm able to do. Okay, and after sanding things down, the last step for me is to come in with a quick setting extra thin cement like this one from Tamiya, and just cover the area with a generous amount of this stuff. And our insignia-free chest piece is done. I use the same method whenever I get rid of any decorative stuff, for example on the chest and also the right knee pad of this fella. For knee pads, preserving the original shape is a bit hard however, so keep that in mind if you think about cleaning off those bits. And while I stuck with 40k Terminator and Deathwing parts for almost every armor so far, for this one I wanted to try out something new, using the Horus Heresy Cataphracti legs. Few things I try to keep in mind when adding bits from different kits are the theme and the scale. Those legs look pretty nerdy to me, so the theme fits and luckily also the scale. This however does not apply to every Horus Heresy kit, so it's always a good idea to check some scale references before buying a box you are hyped about. Okay, and as those legs weren't intended for this body, I needed to cut some stuff away using my clipper and the hobby knife until things seemed to somewhat match. Another key aspect for me when combining bits that are a bit hard to match is using sprue glue. So let me explain my setup here. I in fact have 3 bottles of quick setting extra thin plastic cement around when kitbashing. And the first one is a mix of pretty thick sprue glue, which is molten sprue bits added to the plastic cement. As I like to use it for different tasks, I keep the first mix very thick. I have no exact ratio in mind. Initially I just added around a handful of sprue remains into a half-full bottle of the cement and then waited a few hours, and now to keep it alive I just add a bit of cement and some sprue bits on top of it every now and then. To get the right consistency for every task, I use a second bottle of initially clean cement to dip into the thick one quickly and get the right consistency for every task. Okay, enough explanation. To bring the leg into place, I used a generous drop of the thick solution and let it set on the joint for a little bit. I then come in with the leg, press it in a bit, but not too heavily so that the glue doesn't get squeezed out too much. And just like this, I can now move around a bit to bring it into the position I want it to be. I then repeat the process for the second leg, and while sprue glue bounces relatively fast, it takes some time to harden completely, but then it's really hard. The advantage here is that during this period of mounting and setting, we can still move the bits around to bring everything into place. So now for the legs, I do exactly this, bringing them to the ground and moving them around until the post looks somewhat fine. I'm also really not too concerned with those nasty big gaps right now, as those joints will be hidden in the end anyways. When preparing the torso for the legs, you saw me also cutting away the nut protection piece. This is because every Deathwing Knight needs a nice tabard. Good sources for them are Black Templar Crusaders or the Company Heroes, which is an awesome pick for all sorts of bits by the way. But for this one here, I took this leftover piece from the Inner Circle Companions as I like the look quite a lot. But to make it fit, it needs a bit of fixing. So first of all, I cut away the upper part, which would be hard to integrate, and then I used my hobby knife to carve away the nasty curvature a bit. I then tackled it with some sanding paper to further elaborate the more natural curve, and of course finished it off with a big splash of quick setting plastic cement. And as I also did not want to deal with an exact transition here, I decided to hide it with this armor part from the inner circle companion, trimming off the back and also the front of the belt to make it sit right. You can also add tar buds this way without hiding the original belt, like I did on this Termi here, but you might spend more time cleaning the bit until it fits nicely. And now for the leg guards, I took the original Cataphracti ones. To be honest, while they felt right at the time, looking back on the model, this is the part I would change and take some 40k parts instead. But hey, at least they were big enough so I didn't have to cover so much space in between the legs. And talking about cover-ups, those bags and pouches, which come in various Space Marine kits, are a really great resource to cover any rough parts. So now I just cut one in the right length and pushed it in between the armor panel. And then adding some more cement to boost the adhesion while also flattening any remaining little rough spots and fluffs. For the remaining gaps on the back of the legs, I used the second batch of those Cataphracti armor parts. Again, it felt right at the moment, but overall I'm not too happy with the look in the end. Also, I made a little goo mess, so I quickly fixed it with the clean solution. And now to the arms. Since I like my model's poses a bit more subtle and stoic, most of the more energetic kit options do not make the cut here. So to cope with that, I used this Assault Terminator arm, which had a nice initial appeal for a pose where the character leans on his weapon. To pull this off, I now cut off the weapon on both parts, and since I still wanted to use the hammerhead, I sanded off this slightly silly looking lightning symbol, and to get a long hilt I used the Stormcast spear and cut the cut off piece again to separate the stud. The next part was a bit of a gamble, as I tried to attach several parts of the weapon to the hand again. The problem here is obviously to make them stick properly and align them correctly. Normally I would just use sprue glue for this, as its bond is actually super strong when properly hardened, but with those flimsy little fingers on the hand, which have a great potential to get messed up, I try to get away with the regular cement instead. For the connection between the hammerhead and the hilt, I used some goo however, and then I added this part underneath the head with the cement, juggling it around a bit until everything looked straight enough. The connection on the stud felt pretty strong, and for the not so strong connection to the hilt, I thought that the attachment to the base in the end would give it the right amount of adhesion. Okay, and so for the other arm, I now use the very knightly looking one from the Cataphracti, but to make the Terminator shoulder fit to it, I cut off some of the upper shoulder part before. The good thing with those Terminator shoulder pads is that they are super big, so you can get away with all sorts of rough arm modification and then just hide the mess underneath. And one bit I gave almost all of my Terminators is this Inner Circle Companion's backpack piece. I carefully cut it off with the hobby knife in a manner that gave it a flat spot to attach it to the Terminator's upper armor. For this I used the glue this time, dabbing it into the not anymore clean solution to get it a bit thinner, and then I put some onto the piece and attached it to the armor. Not the sexiest solution, but it's so much quicker than pinning it first and then using putty to fill the gaps. And it is easier to break off some of those spikes than the piece itself. I speak from experience. Okay, now to the most important feature, which is the head. Really making sure to find a position that contributes to the menacing and stoic appeal I aim for. So looking slightly downwards normally is the way to go for me. And if I dislike one thing about the Deathwing kit, it's the shape of the hood. I mean, I get that not everyone is into this Darth Sidious appeal of half covering the face that I like to go for, but no one can convince me that this angular shape on the sides is a good design choice. So I cut away a bit from the hood, and even though I'm not the biggest sculpting fan, I now come in with some putty to fix it again. Spread out a bit too much hand lotion on a plastic sheet to let the putty not stick to the desk or my fingers, and now I mix around a 50-50 mix of yellow to blue or green stuff. Also, I don't want to patronize, but when working with this, I really advise using some gloves. Not only does it prevent you from getting nasty fingerprints on the putty, but it also protects your skin from absorbing chemicals that can potentially harm your hormonal balance and whatnot. So my advice, better safe than sorry. Okay, so now I take a bit of the mixed putty and form a little somewhat rectangular-like piece, really making sure it's pretty thin so that the scale of the cloth thickness aligns well with being miniature. And then I just place it on top and use the silicone tool to bring it into shape. You can also use a toothpick or any other sculpting tool of your choice for it. For the following smoothing steps, however, it's pretty handy to have one of these silicone tools. Okay, and so now I just try to form a somewhat convincing hood shape, having the leader of the Galactic Empire and the Nazgul in mind. For this, I try to get this curvy appeal on the upper part, while covering a relatively big part of the face. And then also add these little rounded extensions to each side while pressing the part in between in the direction of the face. So here are some arrows that somewhat point into the direction I push the putty in. And now, after establishing the rough shape, I come in with my hobby knife and take away all the excess putty I don't need. And after that, I come back with the silicone tool and further smooth out the shape. I wish I could explain better what I'm doing here, but honestly, I'm a bit clueless myself. Sculpting really isn't my strong side, so yeah, I just try to move things around until I like what I see. Okay, and now after letting it set, I want to fix the rough transition between the plastic hood and the putty, since the surrounding armor makes it very hard to cover the whole plastic piece in putty all at once. So instead, I just carve some of it off again until I get something like this. So only the outer shape of the hood remains. And now I come in with Milliput, which is really awesome for smoothing out things and gap filling. At least if you aren't a barbarian like me who uses sprue glue for almost every gap these days. And after mixing both parts equally, I now place a thin, sausage-like piece in between green stuff and plastic, and use the silicone tool to smooth things out. If you're a sculpting rookie like me, this might get pretty messy, but the cool thing about Milliput is that it is water soluble. So what I do when this happens is, I just come in with an old synthetic brush, make it very wet, and just hover over the surfaces until they are clean again. And after letting it set, I like to use the clean plastic cement to get rid of any remaining fluffs. And then I do something I just came up with recently, but it works pretty well in my opinion. So instead of sanding things down, I now use my thick plastic glue, put it into the second solution to make it really thin, and then just apply a very thin layer of molten plastic on top of the whole piece. I even use a bit more for the transition part, which is still a bit uneven, and then come in with the clean solution in the end to give it the final smoothness. Oh yeah, and I lost the hammer during the process. But no worries, I reattached it and also added a fitting tight shield to the right arm. Okay, so all that was left was a fitting base. Here I just slammed a piece of cork with some glue underneath into some wet diorama FX paste, and then sprinkling on some gravel and little rocks. Some of them come from hobby suppliers, but it's a custom mix containing some terrarium ground and even some often cooked soil from the garden as well. I attached it with scenic glue, which is PVA glue with a whole lot of water and a drop of dish soap to break the surface tension. Then I glued the mini in place and used some slate piece to fill some gaps underneath the feet, sprinkling on more gravel and topping everything with another layer of scenic glue. And after slicing down the slate a bit, the mini was done. Okay, so here we are. I think the overall vibe sits, and that's the most important part. The hood looks a bit weird when looking from the mini's left side, but I think that's okay. In reality, it's far less prevalent. You also see some remaining rough spots, but I think they aren't that visible after the paint is applied. So since I'm aiming for a more grim and gritty painting style, it also gives some liberties in regards to the neatness of the conversion. Not everything needs to be super smooth and flat, because some little imperfections can also be integrated into the paint job pretty well. And if you are looking for some painting tutorials for those minis, you may want to check out my Patreon page. So this is the mini I wanted to show you, and now that you know my current workflow, let's quickly talk about the other minis. These are the remaining 4 minis. They are all pretty much based on the new Deathwing Knights bodies, except for this one, which took a similar approach to the recent mini but with regular 30k Terminator legs. And this one, which involved a bit more converting. So here I took the torso from the old Deathwing set, I then cut it into shape while doing the same for the surrounding Terminator armor, and then glued it in and used some Milliput to fill in the large gaps. I also added this string, which is an inside piece from a paracord rope, and attached it there as well to hide some unpleasant carve markings. The banner on top is from the Sternguard wets, pimped up with some Templar relics and a little chain from the hobby store. I actually attached it in the same manner as the top decoration piece on the mini we have covered in this video. For the back, I just added the Lord Exultant cape I had left over from my Emperor's Children project, and then used 2 tile shields to hide the transition. I also properly covered the ventilation vents with the shield, but there is a spot in between, so probably all that happens is that our guy here gets a very warm shield when he somehow gets it off his back. But not least, this is the first menu of the squad I worked on. Not too much alteration going on, except for using the way cooler old Deathwing mace and a sculpted hood. Other than that, it's mostly the pose I worked on by attaching the arms in a more defined manner. I actually cut off little bits and then just glued them in place, covered the joint in sprue glue, and then covered everything with the pauldron. Like I said, those Terminator shoulders are really good to hide unpleasant parts, especially in combination with a good tight shield. Okay, some final thoughts on those minis. The poses and the hoods are really the main factors that define those minis in my opinion. I think these relatively relaxed and imposing postures in combination with ring wraith hoods really sell the feel of a mysterious order of stoic war monks. But generally it's not that I always got a clue what I'm doing. Like sometimes I see a piece of artwork that inspires the posture I aim for, like this fella here who is loosely related to that guy on the codex art. But most of the time I just juggle around with the bits I have at hand and try to position them in a way that contributes to the overall theme I want to establish. I have to admit however that the style of appearance isn't completely consistent for the whole squad. Especially the new guy definitely stands out a bit with his diverging armor and the even more Nazgul-like hood. Fact is, I just really like to come up with new ideas and trying to push things a bit around. So right now it's more of a convolute of ideas that you guys maybe can take some insights from for your own builds. So that's it for today. I hope you found this helpful. There will be more in the future. And again, if you feel generous and want to support the channel on my Patreon page, it would really mean a lot to me. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to like and sub to the channel. See you next time. Take care.